In addition to using the outdoor recreation adoption model to understand the process an individual goes through when they adopt a new activity like hunting or the shooting sports, we can use it to help us understand how our recruitment, retention, or reactivation efforts are impacting that individual's process of adoption. If you'd like to learn more about the adoption model, go to the nationalr3plan.com website where there are resources and videos that can break down elements of the model a little bit more and provide a basic level of understanding. For now, let's take a look at a few examples of R3 efforts and map them on the adoption model to help us understand where there might be ways to improve the effectiveness of our efforts, find partners with our efforts, and improve the overall impact of our general R3 strategy. To begin, let's do a general overview of the outdoor recreation adoption model. Now, in general, what the model illustrates are the steps or stages that an individual goes through in their process of adopting a new activity. In our case, let's use the example of hunting. The arrows between the boxes are really the places where an interaction needs to occur to move an individual from one box to the next. Therefore, R3 efforts in general are impacting those areas between the boxes, moving people from one stage to the next. Now, if we map our efforts according to how many of those boxes we move people through, we can begin to understand how much of that process our effort is impacting, and more importantly, what parts of the process we are leaving out or we are not addressing, and use that information to identify how we can improve not only the R3 effort that we're mapping, but our general strategy of getting people to adopt this activity of hunting. The best way to understand mapping on the adoption model is really just to do it. So let's start with a hypothetical example. We'll use one that is fairly common within state fish and wildlife agencies and conservation NGOs, and it's generally called a skills training workshop or perhaps a hunting skills training field day. Now, what this R3 effort incorporates are opportunities for a participant to learn hunting-related skills. So participants are invited to some location for half day or maybe a full day and are given an opportunity to try skills related to hunting. Perhaps there's a fire building station. Another station could be an air rifle trailer where participants can learn about firearm safety and actually try shooting. Perhaps there's also an archery shooting component. But at the end of the day, participants go away with more knowledge and skills related to hunting. So with that program, now let's lay that onto the adoption model to see how far is that event really pushing participants. So if we start all the way on the left side of the model, the first stage is awareness. And the best way to start our mapping is to start asking ourselves a series of questions. For example, did this event increase the awareness of hunting for participants? Now, we don't know how this has been advertised, but it's safe to say that through whatever advertising was used for it, individuals were made aware of hunting, and when they attended it, they became more aware of what is involved in hunting. So yes, this effort probably increased awareness, so let's start our mapping there. Now let's move to the next box and ask ourselves a similar question. Does this event increase interest in the participants to go hunting? And I think one could reasonably argue that learning skills related to hunting could get somebody very excited to go. So we'll say our effort moves people into the interest stage. Let's move to the next box on the right, which is trial. Now, asking ourselves the same question, does this R3 event or effort give people a trial opportunity to actually go hunting? And obviously, the answer is no. They don't actually go hunting. So the map of our hunting skills training event begins with awareness and ends with interest. And now we can see that the impact of that program on the individual's overall process of adopting hunting really ends right there before trial. All right, let's look at another example, a mentor training hunt. Now, the focus of a mentor training hunt is almost always on getting a participant who has never gone hunting before their first trial. And it generally involves linking up that person with an experienced mentor who is usually a volunteer for a state fish and wildlife agency or a conservation NGO. Sometimes with these events, there's some skills and knowledge training that occur before the hunt itself, but they usually all culminate in taking the participant on an actual hunt. Maybe it's a day, maybe it's a weekend. So let's now look back to the adoption model and start asking ourselves questions with each of the stages. All the way on the left, beginning with awareness, does the mentor training hunt increase awareness of hunting for the participant? Now, if this individual signed up for a trial to go hunting, odds are they were already fairly aware of hunting and probably already fairly interested. So the beginning of our map for a mentor training hunt begins somewhere in interest. Let's move to the right. Does this mentor training hunt give the individual their first trial in hunting? And obviously, yes, it does. Let's keep moving. Now, there's a lot of variability in this decision, and a lot of things depend on the individual, but if the experience was good and the participant and the mentor were compatible, odds are this trial experience allowed that individual to make the decision to go hunting. So let's move to the next box. Does this mentored hunt provide support for the individual to continue hunting? Now, this gets a little bit tricky because it depends largely on how many trial opportunities there were. If this was a long-term mentoring opportunity, then the participant and their mentor would have lots of opportunities over time to learn hunting, for the participants to ask questions and get the support they need to continue hunting on into the future. But for our example, let's use the most common type of mentored hunt that's currently being conducted, and those usually only provide one day or one weekend of hunting, and then the program is over. Therefore, the end of the map for the mentor training hunt is right on the backside of the decision to continue. All right, by this time you're probably getting the hang of this, so let's map an R3 effort that might be a little bit more complicated to think about. Let's do a camp program. And as the title indicates, this type of an R3 effort involves a participant going to a location and staying there for multiple days where they learn a lot of different things. A lot of activities probably go on. A lot of skills training related to the outdoors or hunting. A lot of knowledge training related to the outdoors or hunting. And even there may be activities provided that are sometimes the focus of other R3 efforts like fishing or shooting sports, either with a firearm or a bow. But this is where we have to start getting a little bit disciplined. We're looking at this camp program from the perspective of a hunting R3 effort. So in that light, let's look at the adoption model. If this camp is targeting youth, which they usually do, does this camp, or can this camp, drive awareness and interest in hunting? And given that we have a program that offers multiple days of skills and knowledge training, it's fairly obvious that this R3 effort could easily increase awareness and interest in hunting by the nature of the longevity of it and the number of skills that are provided. However, does it provide a trial to go hunting? And for the vast majority of these cases, it does not. These things usually occur during the summertime, and they usually involve a large enough audience that taking them all hunting is somewhat unrealistic. So for a hunting R3 effort, we stop before trial. Now, let's look at this in a little different light. Let's look at this from the perspective of perhaps an angling R3 effort, where at this camp, the participants are allowed to fish because it is summertime and frequently there's bodies of water close to these camps, and fishing is part of the curricula that's taught. And frequently they're allowed to go fishing multiple times over that week. If we look at the camp from the perspective of an angler R3 program, then the program would indeed push people through trial and probably, or perhaps could, provide enough opportunities to allow them to make that decision to continue, which will translate into their going fishing after they leave the camp. But let's be disciplined for now, and let's stick with this program from the perspective of a hunting R3 effort and again, in that view, it stops in the later stages of interest. What about something like an outdoor expo or an outdoor gear trade show? Now, these events are really interesting to think about. What usually happens here is that a lot of industries, a lot of businesses, a lot of manufacturers fill up a huge convention center, sometimes it's inside, sometimes it's outside, and are there for multiple days and allow thousands of people to walk the expo or trade show floor and look at product, perhaps sample product, and see a huge selection of what is available to hunters and to the hunting culture. Now, this is interesting to think about because we first have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of this expo or this trade show? And if we put a little bit of thought into it, it becomes pretty clear that the purpose is to sell product or sell services to an existing audience, that existing audience being hunters. But it provides such a huge immersion into the culture. The question from a hunting R3 perspective would be, can this type of event drive a individual who has never tried hunting into an actual trial at some point? Can it drive enough awareness and perhaps interest by someone who has never gone hunting attending it that they will actually go and try it? Now, obviously, a expo or a trade show cannot provide a hunting trial opportunity, so for participants who have never gone hunting, at best, these events might push them from awareness into interest. The question we need to ask ourselves is, what kind of culture, what kind of product, what kind of services are being represented at these expos and trade shows, and does that culture appeal to all types of individuals who might want to get into hunting? Now, not a lot of research has been done on these events, and so we don't have much information to answer that question. But this really poses one of the fundamental questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're looking at this model, and that is, what was this event intended to do? And I think the best way to identify the purest intent is ask ourselves, if option A does not happen, would we still do event B? So let's think about it from the individual who has never gone hunting. If these trade shows or expos never got an individual into hunting, never pushed a non-hunter from awareness and interest and got them to try hunting, would these events still take place? For many who do these events or administrate them, the answer is yes, because the prime target and audience are for those who are currently hunting. That leads us to an interesting conclusion, and that is that the purpose, or maybe the R3 utility, of these expos or trade shows might be over on the retention side of the model, for those individuals in the continuation with support or the continuation without support stage. Research indicates that current hunters need this kind of support, inspiration, motivation, new skills, new ideas about new product, new places to go. So for the expo or the trade show, perhaps the best way to think about them is that they provide some of that support for the individuals in the continuation with support, and perhaps, for those attending, might cause them to lapse more infrequently in the future as they get inspired by things that they see, product that they try out at some of these trade shows. Let's do one more tricky one. Let's map a hunter education class on the adoption model. Now, what makes this tricky is that in the past there has been some disagreement between what is hunter safety versus what is hunter education. If you look at the International Hunter Education Association course standards, you'll find that the ultimate goal or outcome of a hunter education class is to produce a safe, legal, responsible, and ethical hunter. In other words, a hunter that does not have a firearm accident that hurts themselves or somebody else, a hunter that complies with all game laws and regulations, and one that behaves ethically in the field. To do that, hunter education classes provide their attendees with the knowledge and skills specifically designed to keep them safe, legal, and responsible when they're in the field. The content of hunter education courses wasn't necessarily created to provide an individual who has never gone hunting with all of the information and knowledge they'll need to have a successful first trial. Honing in on specifically what the hunter education class is designed to do can help us understand its specific role on the model. Let's look at the far left side. Does a hunter education class, or the announcement of a hunter education class, make somebody aware of hunting or interested in hunting? Now, this is where, again, like with previous examples, we have to get very disciplined in our thinking. An individual that is searching for a hunter education class, in most cases, is already aware of hunting and is already fairly interested enough to try to find out more information and educate themselves on how to do this, or someone who has decided, I want to go hunting and I need to take a hunter education class in order to do so. So for most participants, a hunter education class begins at the very late stages of interest and ends before the first trial, because obviously the class itself does not provide that first trial activity. At this point, some of you might be thinking, I understand the mapping process with an R3 effort that is fairly cleanly laid out, when its progression is easy to identify and its objectives are pretty obvious. I wonder how we map something that seems to address or perhaps could impact every stage of the model. Well, this is where the use of the outdoor recreation adoption model gets a little more nuanced, but I think no less useful. A potential R3 effort that frequently comes up during an R3 mapping session is the use of targeted marketing. And this is a good one to look at to help us understand how we think about a fairly tricky concept. That is, the difference between an R3 strategy specifically designed to create more or more avid participants and a tactic you could employ to achieve one of those two outcomes. For example, if your goal with an R3 strategy is to reduce annual churn or annual license churn of, let's say, small game hunters, you may decide to use targeted marketing to reach customers in your license database who have purchased a small game license for the first time, but their license is about to expire. So by sending that specific group a reminder that their license is about to expire, you may achieve your goal of reducing annual churn and may prevent them from lapsing, therefore potentially supporting participants in the continuation with support or continuation without support stages. But could we not also use target marketing to those who have never gone hunting before, but who have recently completed a hunter education course? Well, of course we can, and we probably should. In this case, target marketing could impact the transition from interest to trial by perhaps telling these new hunter ed graduates where to access videos about how to hunt squirrels and where to find hunting areas. It's still target marketing, but it's impacting a different part of the process than the license reminders were. The thing to remember is that when an R3 effort seems to cover all of the stages of the adoption model, that's usually an indication that you're dealing with a tactic useful to R3 in general. But in and of itself, it's not really an R3 effort unless it is used as a tool to address a barrier keeping someone from participating. Other examples of these types of tactics are things like license purchasing incentives, promotional giveaways, mobile apps, information booths, and so on. If you think about a mobile app in general, is it an R3 effort? Well, of course not. Mobile apps have a much broader application than just R3. But if a mobile app is developed to address a documented R3 barrier, like the lack of easy information about squirrel hunting areas, then it does become a useful R3 tactic, perhaps impacting individuals in the trial or continuation without support stage. One other point here is that these kind of tactics, at their core, are frequently rooted in customer engagement or customer service. Remember, things like apps and targeted marketing often have a very broad reach and can serve as useful and general customer service tools. As long as their development is based on addressing documented needs or barriers within your existing and potential customer base, they can be effective in impacting numerous stages of the adoption process. Now, at this point, let's take a step back and look at what we've mapped on the adoption model. As you can see, we have multiple efforts that span different parts of the adoption model. A couple things to note here. One of the more useful aspects of this mapping activity is to help us identify the extent to which different R3 efforts are impacting the individual's process as they move through the adoption of hunting or the idea of hunting. The other thing that it can help us identify is where there are gaps in our efforts, where one R3 effort is not followed up by a next steps for the participant to continue going down the road. Similarly, we can identify with those gaps where our partnering organizations may come in, where we can go to an external R3 stakeholder and ask them to fill in a gap in our current efforts, thereby increasing the impact of the initial effort itself, as well as the impact of our partners' efforts in the long term. In addition, what you'll often find when your organization maps all of its R3 efforts onto the adoption model is that you'll have a lot of efforts stacked up on one side of the model. Usually, it's on the recruitment side. Therefore, visually seeing that the majority of your efforts are only impacting a portion of the adoption model can give your organization the justification it needs to start moving some of its effort from one side of the model to R3 efforts that might perhaps serve as a next step for those going through that first part. Finally, it's important to remember that the utility and effectiveness of the mapping exercise is directly proportional to the discipline applied to it. Whether you're mapping a hunting R3 effort, an angling R3 effort, or a shooting sports R3 effort, there's a tendency among a lot of us to give our programs a little bit more credit than what they're due. If we are going to improve the ultimate reach of our R3 efforts, we have to be very honest with what part of that adoption process our efforts are impacting. If we do that, the ability for us to expand the impact of those efforts by creating next steps, follow-up programs, or linking with our partner will greatly increase, and therefore the ultimate impact of our overall R3 strategy will become more and more effective.